January 3, 2026. 2:47 a.m. A Delta Force operator checks his watch as his Chinook helicopter screams across the Caribbean at 180 miles per hour, heading straight into Venezuelan airspace. In exactly 14 minutes, he'll be standing inside the bedroom of a sitting head of state. In 43 minutes, that president will be in American custody. And in the process, the United States will expose the catastrophic failure of over $2 billion worth of Russian air defense systems and Chinese military technology. This isn't just about capturing one dictator. This is about revealing to the entire world that Russia and China have been selling weapons systems that can't actually protect anyone. What happened that night in Caracas was the most devastating intelligence and technological defeat Moscow and Beijing have suffered in decades. And the implications are going to reshape global power for the next generation. This is the story of Operation Absolute Resolve. How America just proved that Russian defenses are worthless, Chinese technology is obsolete, and no dictator, no matter who protects them, is beyond our reach. For years, Nicolas Maduro believed he was untouchable. And why wouldn't he? Venezuela had spent over $2 billion building what military analysts called South America's most formidable air defense network. A layered fortress designed specifically to stop American military power. At the heart of this system sat Russia's S-300VM surface-to-air missile batteries. Moscow marketed these as capable of shooting down even America's most advanced stealth aircraft. Each battery could theoretically track 24 targets simultaneously, and engage them at ranges of up to 200 kilometers. Venezuela purchased 6 complete systems directly from Russia, along with training packages and technical support from Russian military advisors permanently stationed in Caracas. Surrounding the S-300s were Russian Buk M2E medium-range missiles, the same system that shot down Malaysia Airlines Flight 17 over Ukraine. These were designed to create a second defensive layer, catching anything that slipped through the S-300 envelope. Closer to high-value targets, Venezuela deployed Russian Panzer S-1 gun missile systems. These weapons were specifically designed to destroy exactly what threatened Maduro most: helicopters and drones operating at low altitude. But Russia wasn't Venezuela's only arms dealer. China provided the JY-27A radar network, Beijing's answer to American stealth technology. Chinese engineers claimed these radars could detect F-22 Raptors and F-35 Lightning fighters from over 300 kilometers away using special meter-wave frequencies that supposedly defeated stealth coatings. China also sold Venezuela FK-3 surface-to-air missiles, their export version of the HQ-22 system. These were supposed to provide yet another layer of protection with a range of 100 kilometers. On paper, this looked terrifying. Multiple overlapping defense layers. Russian missiles. Chinese radars. Hundreds of trained operators. Technical support from Moscow and Beijing. Military analysts worldwide consider this the most sophisticated air defense network in the Western Hemisphere outside the United States itself. If America tried to attack Venezuela, the thinking went, it would cost dozens of aircraft and hundreds of lives. The price would be too high. Maduro was protected. On January 3, 2026, every single one of these systems failed catastrophically. Not a single missile was fired at American aircraft. Not one. $2 billion worth of Russian and Chinese military hardware sat silent while American helicopters flew into downtown Caracas, extracted a sitting president from his bedroom, and flew him to a U.S. Navy ship waiting in international waters. But this failure didn't happen by accident. It was the result of months of meticulous planning that exposed every vulnerability in Russian and Chinese military technology. The operation actually began in August 2025, 5 months before the strike. That's when the CIA quietly inserted a small team into Venezuela with one singular mission: develop what intelligence professionals call pattern of life analysis on Nicolas Maduro. Where does he sleep? What does he eat? Where does he travel? Who does he trust? What are his routines? His habits? His fears? CIA officers built a comprehensive profile. They tracked Maduro's movements. They identified his multiple residences. They cataloged his security arrangements. They even learned the names of his pets. But the most critical intelligence came from a source the CIA had cultivated inside Maduro's inner circle. Someone with direct access. Someone who could provide real-time updates on the Venezuelan president's exact location. While CIA officers gathered intelligence on the ground, American reconnaissance aircraft began mapping Venezuela's entire air defense architecture from above. The RQ-170 Sentinel drone, the same stealth platform used in the Bin Laden raid, flew undetected over Venezuelan territory for months. Every time a Venezuelan radar operator turned on their system, American sensors recorded the electromagnetic signature. Every activation. Every scan pattern. Every frequency. The United States was building a comprehensive map of exactly how Venezuela's defenses worked. And more importantly, where they didn't work. By November 2025, U.S. military planners knew more about Venezuela's air defenses than the Venezuelan military did. They knew the exact locations of every radar installation, every missile battery, every command center, every communication node. They knew the coverage gaps, the dead zones created by Venezuela's mountainous terrain where radar couldn't see low-flying aircraft. They knew the integration problems between Russian and Chinese systems that had never been properly tested together. They knew that Venezuelan operators were poorly trained conscripts who hadn't been paid in months and had no real combat experience. And they knew exactly how to exploit all of it. But knowledge alone wasn't enough. The United States needed to position forces for the actual strike. In mid-November 2025, the USS Gerald R. Ford, America's most advanced aircraft carrier, arrived in the Caribbean with its entire strike group. F-35 and F-22 fighters deployed to Roosevelt Roads Naval Station in Puerto Rico, just 700 miles from Caracas. The Vermont Air National Guard sent F-35A aircraft specifically trained in SEAD, suppression of enemy air defenses. These pilots had spent years studying how to defeat Russian-made systems. Marines from the 22nd Marine Expeditionary Unit embarked aboard the USS Iwo Jima Amphibious Ready Group, providing a rapid reaction force if the operation met resistance. This buildup was obvious, visible, intentional. Russian and Chinese intelligence officers stationed in Venezuela watched American forces gathering in the Caribbean. They reported it to Moscow and Beijing. But here's what's absolutely stunning. Russian and Chinese intelligence completely misread what was happening. They thought it was a pressure campaign, psychological warfare, negotiating tactics. They never believed America would actually use military force to capture a sitting head of state. That would be too aggressive, too risky, too unprecedented. So they told Maduro not to worry. The Americans were bluffing. This intelligence failure, the complete inability to predict an obvious military operation, would prove just as devastating as the technological failures that followed. By early December 2025, U.S. military planners had assembled enough force to overwhelm Venezuela's defenses. But they still needed one critical piece of information. Where would Maduro be on the night of the strike? The Venezuelan president had become increasingly paranoid. He moved between multiple locations unpredictably. He varied his schedule. He trusted almost no one. This is where the CIA's penetration of Maduro's inner circle proved invaluable. In late December, the source provided confirmation Maduro would be at his primary residence in central Caracas on the night of January 2, 2026. He would be sleeping in his bedroom. 3rd floor. East wing. That was the window. That was the moment. President Trump approved the operation before Christmas. But weather delays and final preparations pushed execution several times. On January 2, 2026, conditions finally aligned. At exactly 10:46 p.m. Eastern Time, President Trump issued the order. Good luck and Godspeed. Within minutes, aircraft began launching from 20 different bases across the Western Hemisphere, converging on Venezuela in a carefully choreographed operation. And Russia's $2 billion air defense network was about to be exposed as worthless. But before we get to the strike itself, The moment when Russian and Chinese systems failed catastrophically in front of the entire world. If you're hooked on this story, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications for WarRoom Intel. We're breaking down the most significant military operations in history, the missions that expose what real military power looks like, the technology and strategy that's reshaping global dominance. We've got deep dives coming on the Israeli strikes that destroyed Iran's Russian air defenses, Ukraine's drone war that's humiliating Moscow, and classified operations that are still unfolding. You won't want to miss them. Now let's get back to Venezuela. Because what happens next changes everything. The first phase of Operation Absolute Resolve targeted Venezuela's ability to see and respond to the American attack. At 11:58 p.m., EA-18G Growler electronic warfare aircraft orbiting off Venezuela's coast began flooding the electromagnetic spectrum with jamming signals. These weren't ordinary jamming signals. They were specifically tailored to the exact frequencies used by Venezuela's Russian and Chinese radar systems, frequencies the United States had been recording for months. The jamming was so powerful that Venezuelan radar screens immediately filled with static and false targets. Operators saw hundreds of phantom aircraft that didn't exist. Their displays became useless. The Chinese JY-27A radars, the ones Beijing marketed as stealth killers, immediately began malfunctioning. The meter wave frequency that was supposed to defeat American stealth technology proved useless under electronic attack. The radars couldn't distinguish real aircraft from electronic noise. Venezuelan operators, many of whom were poorly trained and hadn't been paid in months, panicked. They tried increasing radar power to burn through the jamming. That was a fatal mistake. The moment they increased power, their radar emissions became beacons for American anti-radiation missiles. AGM-88 HARM missiles, high-speed anti-radiation missiles, streaked toward the radar sites at Mach 2+. The Venezuelan operators had maybe 30 seconds of warning. Not enough time to shut down. Not enough time to relocate. Not enough time to do anything. The missiles impacted with devastating precision. Radar transmitters exploded. Control centers were destroyed. Operators were killed. Within 8 minutes, Venezuela's ability to see incoming aircraft was gone. But the Americans weren't done. Simultaneously, U.S. Cyber Command executed attacks on Venezuela's power grid and military communications networks. Much of Caracas plunged into darkness. Military command centers lost contact with their defensive units. The integrated air defense network that looked so impressive on paper fell apart. Now came the S-300VM batteries, Russia's premier air defense system, the weapons that were supposed to protect Venezuela from exactly this kind of attack. But there was a problem the Russians had never disclosed to their Venezuelan customers. The S-300 was designed for the flat, open terrain of Eastern Europe where radar can detect aircraft climbing to altitude from hundreds of kilometers away. Venezuela's coastal mountains created radar dead zones, valleys and terrain masking where low-flying aircraft were invisible until seconds before impact. American Tomahawk cruise missiles flew through these valleys at 550 miles per hour, hugging the terrain, popping up over ridgelines with only moments of exposure before striking their targets. By the time S-300 operators detected the incoming missiles, they were already too close to engage. The geometry was wrong. The reaction time too short. The Russian systems that theoretically could track 24 targets simultaneously and engage at 200 kilometers couldn't stop subsonic cruise missiles flying 50 feet above the ground through mountain valleys. One by one, S-300 batteries went silent, either destroyed by Tomahawks or blinded by electronic warfare. The Panzer S-1 systems, specifically designed to shoot down the helicopters that would carry Delta Force, sat completely inactive throughout the entire operation. Not a single Russian or Chinese defensive system fired a shot. $2 billion of supposedly advanced military hardware was reduced to expensive scrap metal in less than 20 minutes. And the world was watching. With Venezuelan air defenses neutralized, the second phase began, inserting Delta Force into the heart of Caracas to capture Madura. Helicopters from the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, the legendary Night Stalkers, crossed into Venezuelan airspace, flying at barely 100 feet above the waves. MH-60M Blackhawks and MH-47G Chinooks carried Delta Force operators, FBI hostage rescue team members, and Department of Justice personnel authorized to execute the arrest warrant. The Night Stalkers had practiced this exact mission for months using a full-scale replica of Maduro's compound built from CIA intelligence. At 2:01 a.m. local time, the helicopters arrived at Maduro's residence. F-22 Raptors and F-35 Lightning fighters circled overhead at 40,000 feet, invisible to any remaining Venezuelan radar, ready to annihilate anything that threatened the extraction force. Maduro's wife, Celia Flores, later told interrogators she heard the helicopters approaching. She said to her husband, "I think I hear aircraft outside." But by then, Delta Force operators were already 3 minutes from breaching the compound. The helicopters took small arms fire from Maduro's personal security detail, poorly trained bodyguards with AK-47s firing wildly into the darkness. One Black Hawk was hit multiple times but remained flyable, a testament to both the aircraft's durability and the pilot's skill. Delta Force operators breached Maduro's security perimeter using specialized cutting tools that sliced through reinforced steel doors in seconds. Maduro attempted to flee to a heavily fortified safe room built specifically for this scenario. He almost made it. Almost. Delta Force operators reached him as he was entering the safe room, before he could seal the door. They pulled him back out, threw him to the ground, and zip-tied his hands behind his back. Within 7 minutes of the helicopter's landing, Maduro and his wife were in American custody, being escorted to the waiting aircraft. The extraction phase proved equally dangerous. Venezuelan military units, finally realizing what was happening, opened fire as the helicopters withdrew. F-22s and armed drones provided suppressive fire while the helicopters raced toward the Caribbean with their prisoners. At 3:29 a.m. Eastern Time, the extraction force crossed into international waters with Maduro aboard the USS Iwo Jima. The entire operation, from the first jamming signal to the final helicopter crossing into international waters, had taken less than 3 hours. 7 American service members were wounded during the operation. But remarkably, not a single American life was lost in this extraordinarily complex mission deep into hostile territory. Meanwhile, every Russian and Chinese defensive system that was supposed to protect Venezuela had failed completely. The capture of Maduro was significant on its own, but the broader implications sent shockwaves through Moscow and Beijing. Because this wasn't the first time Russian air defense systems had failed catastrophically against Western military power. Just 7 months earlier, in June 2025, Israel had launched Operation Rising Lion against Iran, systematically dismantling Tehran's Russian-supplied S-300 air defense network. Israeli F-35s penetrated Iranian airspace with complete impunity, striking nuclear facilities, military bases, and killing top Revolutionary Guard commanders. The Iranian S-300 systems, purchased from Moscow specifically to defend against Israeli and American attacks, proved totally ineffective. Israel had spent years preparing for this operation, including pre-positioning drone systems inside Iran that activated simultaneously with the main air attack to overwhelm defenses. By the time Rising Lion concluded, Israel had destroyed all of Iran's S-300 batteries. American officials privately described Iran as essentially naked and defenseless against future aerial attacks. The 12-day Israel-Iran war demonstrated that sophisticated electronic warfare and stealth technology could render even Russia's most advanced air defenses completely useless. And Ukraine had been proving this on an even larger scale throughout 2025. In June 2025, Ukrainian intelligence executed Operation Spiderweb, smuggling over 100 drones into Russia using unsuspecting truck drivers. These small quadcopters attacked Russian strategic bomber bases across 5 time zones, damaging aircraft that formed the backbone of Russia's nuclear deterrent. Russian air defenses, supposedly designed to protect the motherland from exactly this type of attack, failed to prevent drones from reaching targets over 2,500 miles from Ukraine. By December 2025, Ukraine was launching record numbers of drones against Russian targets. Over 4,000 were shot down in that month alone. But many more got through. Moscow's airports were repeatedly shut down by drone attacks. Russian citizens sheltered while air defenses struggled to cope with the aerial onslaught. The Venezuela operation confirmed a devastating pattern that Russia and China could no longer deny. Russian air defense systems designed to counter American technology were failing everywhere they faced real combat conditions. Military analysts identified several reasons for these catastrophic failures. First, the fundamental design philosophy. The S-300 was built for the flat terrain of Eastern Europe where radar has clear lines of sight for hundreds of kilometers. Venezuela's mountains, like Iran's complex geography, created dead zones where American aircraft could approach undetected until seconds before impact. Second, Russian systems require extensive training and constant maintenance that export customers simply cannot provide. Venezuelan operators received Russian manuals translated into Spanish, but they lack years of integrated training needed to operate these complex systems effectively. When American electronic warfare flooded their screens with hundreds of false targets, these operators froze instead of executing the sophisticated countermeasures required. The Chinese radar systems suffered from equally fundamental problems. Beijing had marketed the JY-27A as a stealth killer, capable of detecting low observable aircraft through meter-wave frequency resonance effects. The physics behind this claim has some theoretical validity. Very high-frequency radars can sometimes detect aircraft that shorter wavelength systems might miss. But detection is worthless without the ability to track targets precisely enough to guide missiles to intercept them. And this is where Chinese systems failed completely. The JY-27A's angular resolution proved far too poor to provide weapons quality tracking data to the Russian missile systems it was supposed to support. American stealth aircraft simply flew through what was supposed to be an impenetrable sensor network, undetected and unmolested, until they had already completed their mission. The Venezuelan operation exposed another critical vulnerability: the lack of integration between Chinese and Russian systems. On paper, Venezuela's air defense network looked formidable. Multiple radar types feeding data to various missile batteries creating overlapping coverage. In practice, these systems had never been tested together against a sophisticated adversary. The seams between them proved fatal. When American cyber warfare disrupted communications and power infrastructure, the entire network collapsed instead of degrading gracefully. Individual components couldn't operate independently. Data sharing broke down. Command and control evaporated. But perhaps the most devastating failure wasn't technological at all. It was intelligence. Russian and Chinese intelligence services completely failed to predict or prevent the American operation. For months, American aircraft carriers, fighter jets, and thousands of troops had been openly deploying to the Caribbean. This wasn't subtle. It wasn't hidden. The buildup was visible to anyone with eyes. Yet Russian intelligence, the same SVR and GRU that pride themselves on understanding American intentions, completely misread what was happening. Moscow apparently believed the American buildup was merely a pressure campaign. Psychological warfare. Negotiating leverage. They never thought America would actually execute a decapitation strike against their ally. Chinese intelligence proved equally blind. Both Russia and China had military advisors, intelligence officers, and technical specialists stationed in Venezuela supporting the air defense systems they'd sold. These personnel had front-row seats to the American buildup. Yet their reports to Moscow and Beijing apparently failed to convey the imminent danger. This wasn't just a tactical oversight. It was a comprehensive intelligence failure that reveals how poorly Russia and China understand American decision-making. American spy satellites and reconnaissance aircraft had mapped every radar installation, every communications node, every potential target months before the operation. The military buildup served multiple intelligence purposes beyond positioning forces. By flying aircraft near Venezuelan airspace, the U.S. provoked reactions that revealed how the defense network operated. Each Venezuelan radar activation provided data on frequencies, scanning patterns, and coverage gaps. Russian and Chinese intelligence should have recognized this pattern. It was the same probing strategy America used before operations in Iraq, Libya, and Syria. Instead, they dismissed American activity as routine exercises rather than genuine preparation for war. The consequences of this failure extend far beyond Venezuela. The operation didn't end with Maduro's capture. America continued demonstrating dominance over Venezuela's supposedly protected waters. Weeks before the strike, the United States had established a naval blockade targeting sanctioned oil tankers attempting to enter or leave Venezuelan ports. One vessel, the Bella I, became a symbol of American determination to enforce this blockade regardless of Russian protection. The tanker had been transporting sanctioned oil for Venezuela, Iran, and Russia when American forces began pursuing it. The crew attempted desperate measures, repainting the ship's name mid-voyage, raising a Russian flag, requesting Moscow's protection. Russia granted the tanker, now renamed Marinera, temporary permission to sail under the Russian flag, providing diplomatic and military protection. The Russian Navy reportedly dispatched a submarine and surface warships to escort the tanker as it fled toward Europe. But on January 7, 2026, U.S. Navy SEALs boarded and seized the vessel roughly 190 miles south of Iceland, despite the Russian naval presence. Russian military assets in the vicinity could not prevent American special operators from capturing the tanker and detaining its entire crew. This seizure, conducted in the face of Russian naval forces, sent another unmistakable message: American willingness to enforce its interests regardless of opposition. The implications of Operation Absolute Resolve are reshaping global power dynamics right now. Countries that purchase Russian air defense systems are questioning whether these weapons can actually protect them. Prospective buyers of Chinese military equipment must wonder whether Beijing's performance claims will survive contact with American electronic warfare. But beyond hardware failures, potential customers now question whether Russian and Chinese intelligence can even warn them when an attack is coming. Russia's ability to market itself as a reliable security partner has suffered a devastating blow. Their systems failed. Their intelligence failed. Their protection proved worthless. The Kremlin's air defense systems were supposed to demonstrate that countries could resist American power by purchasing Russian military hardware. Instead, every recent test against serious Western opposition has ended in complete and humiliating failure. For China, the Venezuela debacle raises uncomfortable questions about whether its military equipment can perform in actual combat against American forces. Taiwan, facing the possibility of Chinese invasion, must be carefully studying how American forces defeated systems that Beijing also uses domestically. The operation demonstrated that American intelligence capabilities, electronic warfare superiority, and stealth technology combined to create an overwhelming advantage. No matter how much money adversaries spend on defensive systems, the United States can penetrate those defenses when it chooses to. And no matter how many intelligence officers Russia and China deploy, they apparently cannot predict or prevent American military operations against their allies. The capture of Nicolas Maduro was not merely the arrest of an indicted narco-terrorist. It was a demonstration of American power that humiliated Moscow and Beijing on the global stage. Operation Absolute Resolve proved that in 21st century warfare, technological superiority and intelligence dominance can overcome even the most heavily defended targets. The message to America's adversaries is crystal clear. Russian air defenses cannot protect you. Chinese radars cannot detect us. Your intelligence services cannot save you. Russia and China watched helplessly as their ally was dragged from his bed. Their weapons rendered useless. Their intelligence proven worthless. Their protection exposed as a lie. This is how the United States actually defeated Russia, China, and Iran, not through traditional battlefield confrontation, but through decisive demonstration of capabilities they cannot match and failures they cannot hide. The era of Russian and Chinese military dominance in developing nations is over. Every dictator who thought Moscow or Beijing could protect them now knows the truth. When America decides to act, nothing can stop us. For more breakdowns of the operations that are reshaping global power, Subscribe to WarRoom Intel and hit that notification bell. What operation should we cover next? The Israeli strikes that destroyed Iran's defenses? Ukraine's drone war against Russia? Let us know in the comments. This was Operation Absolute Resolve. The night America proved that no amount of Russian or Chinese hardware can protect you from American resolve.